So President Cyril Ramaphosa called on South Africans to emulate weaver birds in rebuilding the country. In his opening of Parliament address last week, Ramaphosa said weaver birds are among the most gregarious birds in that they build complex structures together. According to the president's speech, that call was made due to the formation of the newly formed Government of National Unity. Well, let's unpack the weaver bird analogy with project leader at Indlulamithi SA Scenarios, Xolelwa Kashe-Katiya. Xolelwa, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. This was quite the analogy that the president made in his opening of Parliament address, right? The debates have happened and he's responded to all the questions and issues that have been raised by members of Parliament. But I want to go back really to that scenario. The weaver bird, the hardy-dar and the vulture. What did you hear when the president gave us that picture?
Good morning, Naledi, and good morning to your viewers at home. Yes, I mean, we were taken by surprise when we heard the president referencing scenarios that are, by the way, soon to be launched on the 1st of August. But what was interesting is that he managed to capture the messaging behind the metaphor of the birds, with the weaver work being a reflection of a nation that cooperates, that partners with business, civil society, and the general public in taking the country forward. However, what I think we need to pay attention to is what he mentioned about the rupture that is actually described in the weaver's work scenario, because this does not just come automatically, especially considering the last scenarios that we had that had left us in a state of lawlessness, which we had named Gwara when we released our barometer result. So now to jump from the Gwara nation of lawlessness to weaver is going to take a lot of work. And in that particular scenario, what we describe is a nation that is dissatisfied with the level of, with the lack of service delivery rather, and just graft that increases with no consequences. And as a result, the nation erupts into protest mode, which then brings civil society together, youth leaders and other social movements. And that's how then the weaver work nation is attained. So it's not an easy path, especially considering where we are right now, and also in consideration of the other two scenarios, which are not as pleasant, which is the hardy-dar and the vulture culture.
Yeah, let's talk about those, right? The hardy-dar, the bird that I suppose complains, that you hear a lot. One wonders, of course, who that is. You know, I wondered who the vultures are, for instance, but I want to hear the scenarios of those two birds.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we prefer not to name, as we are dealing with the future, and the future there's a lot of uncertainty there. But on the basis of the research that we did, based on the focus group discussions and the interviews, but also the research papers that were then commissioned, what we found is that, first of all, there are coalition governments across all three scenarios, including the weaver work. But in the hardy-dar scenario, what we have is a centrist coalition government that spends its time bickering. And we all know that South Africa is a very loud democracy. But herein we see an even louder democracy, wherein the blame game becomes the order of the day. We blame each other, we blame the foreigners, we blame the blacks, we blame the whites, the rural, the women and men, and so on. So there's no improvement, but rather a very noisy democracy. In the vulture culture, what we see there is a coalition government that becomes more authoritarian as a strategy to respond to crime and graft, but then it becomes too heavy-handed against its own citizens. And as a result, there's anger and resentment. And but then it utilizes, SOEs such as SABC to ensure that it thrives through the 2029 and the 2034 election. However, those elections are also discredited by other African countries who come to observe those. In the weaver work, the coalition government is actually forced by the uprising, because I've mentioned that there's this rupture. And as a result of that, then there is a response with a more collaborative effort and coalition government that emerges in 2029.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting, we were having a discussion earlier with Aldrin and Andy in our paper run about, you know, if the electorate in any way feels betrayed by, you know, the coalition leadership and, you know, some are calling it a grand coalition, some are calling it the government of national unity. And I wonder if that Weaver approach is really what South Africans were asking for, in your view. You've heard political leaders after these elections saying, well, South Africans have asked us to work together. And I made the argument that prior to the election, when they campaigned to the electorate, they said, vote for us to lead, not for us to lead with others, right? So where do you place that argument? Were the South Africans asking for the Weaver bird?
I think what South Africans were asking for was more accountability. And what I think was encouraging about this election is that after a long period of believing that South Africans were hopeless and were not interested in voting, but this election revealed something that was quite surprising, that indicates that citizens are actually aware and becoming increasingly aware of their agency. So that's what I would take from it, because through the vote alone, something has shifted. And I think it depends on how the state then, or this new government that has been formed, responds, because now they are dealing with a citizenry that is more woke, so to speak, and understands that the vote can do something, but there's other activities that citizens can demonstrate to actually show active citizenry. And that's what I think this government needs to be concerned about, because the citizens are no longer just hopeless and disengaged.
Yeah, I think the big concern, though, is even when we use, I mean, one thing that you can't deny is the president is, in his opening of Parliament addresses, whether it be SONA or the opening of Parliament address like he did last week, is really good at giving us sort of scenarios, right? And even ideals for us to live by. So the idea of Tumamina, for instance, right at the beginning there of his time, and now this Weaver bird approach. One wonders, though, if South Africans take that to heart, particularly when you start to look at some of the divisions that we already are starting to see in our leadership. You've got you know, an IFP leader who is now a COGTA minister talking about going into municipalities and GNUing those municipalities, right? Ensuring that they're able to let the GNU be reflective even at local government level. And then you've got a progressive caucus that feels that it is not very much a part of that process. And so, you know, are those divisions going to be a hindrance to this beautiful ideal of a Weaver nation?
Another thing, Naledi, is that Weaver work is not just about politicians working together. It's about the whole of society, all the social partners working together. As long as there's civil society is not included or business is not brought into the fold, then it's not the true Weaver work that we are talking about here. Because remember, citizens don't trust politicians at all. And that's what we went in with. And that's what one of our findings in terms of all the variables we worked with and all the key drivers. So to make it a truly Weaver work, it would require that leadership from below, sort of like an upswell from below that then pushes, you know, the political setup to change how it does things, because politicians alone are not going to be able to take us to the Weaver work. You do need business. You do need citizens, ordinary citizens. There's lots of formations in our communities that are doing wonderful work, and they do enjoy the legitimacy that the state or politicians do not enjoy within the communities.
Yeah, asking for active citizenry from us all. Xolelwa, an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much. She's giving us really something to reflect on. And perhaps we've talked about what we need to do then to become the Weavers, what we need to be holding ourselves accountable for then as citizens, that we're not the hardy-dars and the vultures, if you will. All right, let's Xolelwa Kashe-Katiya, the project leader at Indlulamithi SA Scenarios, speaking to us this morning.